And I'm going to go ahead and start recording. So I want to thank you all very much for coming. This is a panel that is near and dear to my heart. As a person of faith, I have long wanted to marry my personal belief system with the ethos of my work in providing housing for my fellow neighbors who have money and who don't have money, and to really be an agent of change in that way. And so when I got introduced to Sarah Walker and the team at National Core because of the housing project that was done in Placentia and in Buena Park at Church of the Blessed Sacrament, and in Placentia and in St. Joseph's in Buena Park. It was an awesome opportunity to bring together the developer and the bishop. And then I knew also about Rusty Bailey, Mayor Rusty Bailey, and in his term, the amazing work and the amazing social capital that existed in the Riverside community of churches, and his functional ending of veteran homelessness while he was mayor. And he did that with the help of the churches. And so there are some awesome stories in this group. There are also a lot of awesome stories that are not in this group. So I in no way want to say that this is the network of folks that I knew and I could pull together, but there are undoubtedly other folks in other parts of California, other parts of Southern California, and we're going to have an opportunity to hear about them from Jill Shook, who has a nonprofit that she started called Making Housing Happen, and that works with different types of churches in LA County predominantly, but also in Colorado. So we have a lot to learn from all of these panelists. So I'm just going to go really quickly around. Rusty Bailey is the former mayor of the city of Riverside. Now he is the head of the Path of Life Ministries. Bishop John Taylor is the Episcopal Bishop of the LA Archdiocese of the Episcopal Church. Yes, I'm a little in awe. Sarah Walker works with National Core. She's a planner and a person who does entitlements for development. National Core stands for National Community Renaissance. They are I think one of the largest nonprofit developers. They've done a lot of projects around here. They're based in Rancho Cucamonga, which is in the Skag region. And again, Jill Shook has a ministry through Making Housing Happen, and I will let her, she's written a book, which I can't remember the title of, but I think it's Making Housing Happen. And if it is, that would be great. I know her website is makinghousinghappen.org. And then I want to just introduce myself. My name is Elizabeth Hansberg. I founded the YIMBY group for Orange County called People for Housing in 2017, and then in 2020 we merged into YIMBY Action, which is a larger umbrella organization for local YIMBY groups, and that's why it says YIMBY Action, because I have not yet renamed myself. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Bishop John for his comments to us about what would compel congregations to want to do this. Thank you, and take it away, Bishop John.
Elizabeth, friends, thank you so much. Elizabeth, for organizing this panel, and all others for being present after what I'm sure has been a busy day, much of it spent on Zoom, and yet here you are using discretionary time for the sake of the least among us to be on yet another Zoom call. I first met Elizabeth when she brought her considerable energy and theological firepower in terms of faith in action alongside National Core and the people of St. Joseph's Church in Buena Park to enable a successful city council vote on behalf of our project there. She's an absolute marvel, and she's organized this evening beautifully. So Elizabeth, thank you. As she's told you, the question to me is what's in it for the church? And it's a good question. It's a question rooted in language about transaction, isn't it? About getting our interests served, about getting value for our money. And this is by and large helpful language for nations and for enterprises. But the contract I'll begin with is what people of the Abrahamic faiths, all 3 or 4 billion of us, call the Abrahamic Covenant. It comes from the Abraham cycle of stories in the book of Genesis, which is part of Torah for those who who revere the Hebrew scriptures in and of themselves. And I will not go into a long Bible study on the Abraham cycle. I will just put it in the terms I used with the 5th and 7th graders I used to teach religion to down at St. John Chrysostom Church in Rancho Santa Margarita in Orange County. And this was all they had to learn in 3 semesters to get at least a B. That the Abrahamic Covenant is God loves us, we love God. God loves us, we love God. Now, you'll notice there's a semicolon in there. You maybe heard it. God loves us, we love God. There's not a so or a therefore. It's not strictly transactional. It's not we love God because we owe it to God because he gave us all these goodies. It's more profound than that. It's a thing that happens when we finally recognize that we're truly God's beloveds. It's not necessarily when we're taught it, but one day by God's grace, we experience it. So you see a friend you never met before like Elizabeth, full of joy and justice in the lobby of the city council chambers of the city of Buena Park. And it's one of those reminders that comes along that we're all doing the same work together, whether Lutherans or Episcopalians or Baha'is or Muslims or people who just believe in humanist values if they're rooted in love, whatever they are, we're all of us doing the best we can. And you have those moments that you realize you're bathed in God's love. And once you realize that, you want to glorify God and you want to care for God's people. So a well-lived Christian life, and perhaps this can be said for all people of faith, is that we live and learn our way past worrying quite so much about protecting our accumulated possessions and territory, protecting our prerogative, protecting our privilege. We realize that peace truly comes from putting other people first. You may remember our Episcopal presiding bishop, Michael Curry, whom we're very, very proud of, and you may remember him from Harry and Meghan's wedding. He calls it the way of love. So the answer to the question, what's in it for the church, is that by following the way of love, by moving over and providing a place for our neighbors, we get to do what we're created to do. So we should say, thank you for giving it up for housing. Now, a Christian would elaborate it with a little bit of scripture. A Christian would say, well, we also follow a Savior who had nowhere to lay his head. We follow a Savior who promised salvation to those who treated those who were most in need as though they were Jesus. And a Christian ethicist would add this: there's something in the human character, and we all have it. It's part of our gene that contributes to sort of self-protection, which is not always a bad thing. But it also can tempt me to look at the weakest or the least privileged individual in a system and construe that individual as a threat. It happens over and over again. There's a debate now in the wake of some decisions that the president's made in Washington about the rights of our transgender siblings. They comprise perhaps 2 or 3% of the population. And yet you would think from the controversy that this tiny cohort was on the verge of destroying women's sports and taking over the entire Olympic movement. Think what you will about the issue, my friends. That's not my point. My point is always to remember that humans are tempted to turn victims into victimizers to protect position and privilege. We do it with the unhoused as well. We construe them as criminals and destroyers of property values. But the person of faith, as prone as anyone to these impulses, we remember, if we're Christians, Jesus saying, whoever cares for the least among you cares for me. The homeless person is not necessarily Jesus. Our unhoused sibling may not be our Savior incarnate, but Jesus is watching how we treat them. Nevertheless, I have a practical answer too about what's in it for the church. Money. There was a great boom of church building in Southern California after World War II. Many of you know this story well. There was unprecedented growth in the mainline Protestant denominations, especially. And so in the suburbs by and large, but also closer into downtown areas, we've got these big churches on big pieces of property that were designed for congregations, which in the late 40s, the 50s, early to mid 60s were perhaps 2, 3, or 4 times the size of the congregations that are there now. So right now, a lot of our churches have some understandable anxiety over attendance decline. Now, I don't want to be too much of an optimist about this. We are in a secularizing time, and fewer people will profess a denominational faith, although polls do suggest that almost all people still believe in a power in the universe larger than ourselves. Also, we in the church have not always distinguished ourselves in representing the values of God as we're supposed to. And finally, a lot of the younger people among us are not wild about older institutions. But basically what's happening in the denominational church is that we're reverting to our pre-World War II condition. We're not much smaller now than we were in the 1920s and 1930s. So my faith is that churches are going to continue to thrive if they cultivate their curiosity about the lives their neighbors are living, especially lives that are different from the ones that we are, especially when we cultivate curiosity across lines of differences in culture, language, and socioeconomics. And then once we're curious, we begin to form relationships. Once we form relationships, we recognize our obligation. We begin to live into the way of love, and then we are hooked. When we get to know people on the ground, the way Mayor Rusty has gotten to know unhoused people in the city of Riverside on the ground, mano a mano, we fall in love and we naturally apply whatever resources they have. God loves us, we love God, it's automatic. And if churches in Southern California are doing that, and if they've got real estate and room to spare, well, that ends up being the way of Jesus. That ends up being the way of love. That ends up being the gospel according to ground leases. And the next preacher on tonight's card, Sarah Walker, she's gonna take up the story of how it actually happens.
Oh my goodness, thank you so much. It's going to be a hard act to follow you. Thank you for having me. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I'm not as eloquent as the bishop, so I will be using slides in order to tell my story. So I am a senior project manager with National Community Renaissance. Hold on just a moment while I get this up and running. My apologies.
It's up, it's running.
Oh, it is. Okay, great. Thank you for that. Then, so yeah, my name is Sarah Walker, and I'm a senior project manager with National Community Renaissance, also known as National Core. And I am really excited to get to be part of this panel and to share some of my stories and experience working on developing affordable housing in partnership with local churches in Orange County. So, that's not a damn thing. Sorry, I don't know what's happening here. Sorry, guys. I even tested this a few times beforehand and I'm still managing to mess it up. Okay, let me reshare. Okay. There we go. Is it back up? You guys are able to see it? Okay, and we'll try again advancing the slides. And it is not advancing for me. Well, this is going to be interesting.
Do you want to send it to me and I'll you want to send it to me and I'll show it and then you can tell me to advance it?
Yeah, sorry, I should have sent it to you ahead of time. Let me try one more time to see if I can get it up and running.
Okay.
Okay. That over there. Okay.
Not yet.
Yeah, and it's not working. My apologies.
Somebody wrote in the chat that you have to click start from, where did it go? Beginning. Start from first slide in the slideshow.
Okay, sorry. Okay, I think that I have it up and running again. So let me share my screen one more time. And okay, see if it advances. Can you now see it?
Yes.
All right. Okay. My apologies. We'll start this again. So I am with National Community Renaissance, and I wanted to just kind of quickly share that we are a nonprofit affordable housing developer. As Bishop John was sharing, we specialize in family and seniors, as well as special needs communities throughout Southern California. And we also believe that both people and place matter, and that leading a healthy lifestyle really starts with the basic requirement of having a stable and affordable home. So just kind of a quick overview of National Core. We have been doing this for quite a while, almost 30 years, and we own and operate roughly 10,000 units. About 8,500 of those units are located in Southern California. And one of the things that I feel does make us unique is that we have a number of departments in-house, from acquisitions to the land entitlement process, financing, as well as construction, and then continuing into operation. We continue on to own our properties for the long haul, and we consider ourselves to be part of a neighborhood. When we develop housing, we stay for the long term and want to be a good neighbor. So as Bishop Taylor was starting to share, the reality is in the past, most developers have looked to public agencies, cities, or housing authorities to develop affordable housing on publicly owned land. We also occasionally do work with brokers to identify, vacant or underutilized sites that may have come on the market. However, as cities become more and more built out, it is becoming increasingly difficult to find these large, lovely, flat, rectangular parcels to develop on. And so in the last few years, we have seen that within most existing neighborhoods, there are quite a few infill opportunities, especially when you start to look at the number of churches, particularly in Orange County. And so in some instances, we do have a project where a church was consolidating their campuses due to a decline in their congregation numbers. And so that created a surplus property. For tonight, what I wanted to talk about is two projects that we are that we are working with in partnership with the diocese, the Episcopal Diocese of Los Angeles, as well as the local churches, in order to actually do infill development on sites where the churches are going to remain and continue to operate. So these two projects are located in the cities of Placentia and Buena Park, and they are both partnership projects with the diocese. And we have been really fortunate to have Bishop Taylor and the leadership of both churches as kind of our biggest supporters on these projects. So I'm going to share a little bit about each one and kind of then some of the challenges that we faced on both of them. So the first one that I wanted to talk about is the Santa Angelina Senior Apartments in the city of Placentia. It's a partnership project with National Core, the Blessed Sacrament Episcopal Church, the Diocese of Los Angeles, and also initially it included the Episcopal Community Services. And they actually were the ones that connected National Core with the church because they had this vision of introducing affordable housing onto their site, but needed some guidance and assistance in making that happen. So this site is located at 1314 North Angelina Drive. And it's roughly 3.9 acres. And you can see the church is centrally located in the center of the site. It operates out of two main buildings, a parish hall, and they also have a classroom building. And then they also have a large surface parking lot. And there's also kind of at the northern and southeastern corner, there are kind of undeveloped landscaped areas. So we love this site because looking at it has a pretty good walk score and it's pretty accessible to a number of amenities, which for us as the developer, we look for when we're trying in order to score well on our financing application. It's often something that increases your competitiveness for funding. So National Core on this project is proposing to develop a senior affordable housing community that will have 65 units in 2 buildings, 58 one-bedroom units and 6 two-bedroom units and 1 studio. And the overall density for this project is actually only 16.7 dwelling units per acre. And the buildings are both only 2 stories in height. And you can see this church is going to remain in the center, and we're going to be constructing the 2 buildings on either side, kind of creating an interconnected campus. The residential development will have a number of amenities, including a community room and gardens and a fireplace outdoors, as well as seating areas. And then, you know, in order to actually develop building 1, we are going to have to demolish the church's existing parish hall. And so we've worked very closely with the vestry in order to redesign and create a new parish hall design, which will be constructed as part of the project, as well as kind of a courtyard area, creating a nice kind of community space off of Angelina Drive. With parking really quick, there are 85 existing parking spaces for the church, and we are going to be adding 45 for the residential units. So there will be a total of 130 units, but the density or the parking ratio for the residential piece is actually only 0.7 spaces per unit. And just kind of to give you kind of a vision of what we've developed here, this is a view of building 1 that's at that northern end of the property, showing how those new residential units are going to kind of interface with the new parish hall. Here's another view showing this is the other building, building 2, the southern end, that will be facing the single family homes across Morse. And you can kind of see how the building at 2 stories, it's, you know, a pretty low scale, and it's been designed to carefully fit into the existing neighborhood context. So as I mentioned, Santa Angelina will have 64 affordable units to households or seniors rather that are earning less than 60% of the area median income. And 21 of those units are set aside for permanent supportive housing for formerly homeless seniors. And then there will be 1 exempt manager's unit. So the other project I wanted to share is Orchard View Senior Gardens, or Orchard View Gardens Senior Apartments, which is in the city of Buena Park. And this is the one that we were fortunate to have Bishop Taylor attend the city council hearing and express his support. And we had a great hearing for this particular project, but it was a long process to get us there. So again, this is a partnership project between National Core, St. Joseph's Episcopal Church, the Episcopal Diocese of Los Angeles, and also ECS, or Episcopal Community Services. And it was initiated in 2018 after National Core got involved in the Santa Angelina project in the city of Placentia. So this particular development is located at 8300 Valley View Boulevard, and it is a 3.2 acre project site that is currently home to St. Joseph's Church. You can see it's located on the southern portion of the site, and it's surrounded by surface parking, and it's a single building. And then the northern portion of their site is relatively undeveloped. There is an older building on there, and as well as just vacant, kind of unlandscaped area. So the project proposes to actually subdivide the existing parcel into 2 new parcels. And so parcel 1 would maintain the church and the surface parking. And then the new parcel on the northern end will be developed with new affordable housing. And so this shows you kind of the concept. So on this northern parcel, we're proposing 66 residential apartment homes also for seniors. This is 62 1-bedroom units and 4 2-bedroom units. And they're proposed in 1 larger building that's 3 stories, as well as 9 single-story casitas along the northern property line. The density for this project is actually 37.5 dwelling units per acre because it's a smaller parcel and it's not as spread out. So we had to carefully design this project with context to the neighborhood. It's 2 stories fronting the street. It steps up to 3 stories, back down to 2, and then we have the 1-story casitas along the property line. So the church had an existing 121 parking space lot on, and in order to develop the housing, we are having to actually remove 48 spaces. And so, or I'm sorry, we are having to remove 46 spaces, and we will be adding 48 spaces for the residential units, which is a parking ratio of 0.72 spaces per unit. We'll talk a little bit more about parking in just a minute. So here, this kind of shows you this shows you that larger building 1 and how it's going to look in the context of with the church. So you can see it's kind of set back, and it kind of creates like a nice open space for the church facing the street, with the building behind it. And then this kind of shows you that internal courtyard area. This would be if you're kind of standing at the church and looking at the housing. You can see how there's the building 1 that's 3 stories and steps down into the lower density casitas. And again, this project contains 65 units and, 66 units, and 65 of those will be affordable to households earning 60% of the area median income or below. And 8 units are set aside as permanent supportive housing. There would be 1 exempt manager's unit. So to dive into the challenges a little bit. So in navigating the entitlement process, the reality is that there are a number of entities that are involved, and they often all have strong opinions, and they all have, you know, certain requirements that they need to have met. And so, you know, you've heard a little bit from Bishop John about, you know, you have the church as the landowner, and the visionary often for these projects. We also had the church vestry for each, you know, for St. Joseph's, as well as for the Blessed Sacrament, as well as the congregation members. We also had to, you know, get involved with city staff and also elected officials to make sure that we are, that the projects are meeting the codes and the development objectives for the city. You also have neighbors who are living in the, you know, surrounding area that are ultimately impacted by this new development occurring near their homes. And then there's us and what we need as a developer in order to, for example, navigate deadlines for certain funding sources, and also trying to make sure that all of the stakeholders are ultimately pleased with the final product. So I wanted to share, this is actually a slide that we included it. Oops, this kept advancing. It's gonna keep advancing, so I'm just gonna let it go. But ultimately what this, what that slide is showing is the number of meetings that we had for our Placentia project. And it actually doesn't even depict all of them, but it shows the various steps that we had to go through of, you know, meeting with the church vestry and getting a plan together, and then taking it to the city staff and getting their approval, taking it to the development subcommittee and getting their approval, and then to the community. And it just kind of shows this winding, you know, trail of all these meetings and outreach that was conducted in order to try to ultimately, you know, come up with a design that ideally everybody feels good about. And so, you know, that winding trail of outreach meetings also kind of resulted in a winding trail of different site plan iterations, which is what is being shown on the screen right now. So, you know, generally with each meeting that we're having, there would be a series of meetings with our design team in order to adjust the site plans and to react to these things. So specific to, this is the Placentia project, and it shows you kind of the evolution of how the design evolved over time. You can see that the building footprints kind of shift from side to side, depending on the meeting that we had at that time, whether it was city staff or the neighbors or the church vestry. And so, you know, ultimately, I guess you can see that, you know, that final site plan, you know, we were able to kind of figure out a solution that all of the stakeholders, ultimately, maybe everybody gave up a little something, but everybody felt like they could live with it, or at least feel good about it. So really, the moral of the story is talk to your neighbors very early on, talk to city staff very early on so that you can understand their concerns and get their input. And then, ultimately there will be people that still just don't want the project. And in that case, you need to call Elizabeth and the people for housing, and you need to talk to her about strategies on how to garner support, because she was, very critical in helping get this project, getting both of these projects approved. The second challenge I wanted to talk about is the complexity and the number of applications that were required in order to get the developments approved. For Placentia, we needed a general plan amendment. From low density residential to high density residential. We needed to rezone from R1 to R3. We had to request a parking reduction based on the affordability of the units. We also had to go through the development plan review process, which required a pre-application, a development ad hoc subcommittee meeting, community meetings, ultimately back to the development subcommittee, and then finally approval hearings. And because we were doing a general plan amendment, we also had to complete an initial study mitigated negative declaration for CEQA, which required a number of technical studies, and also it does add time to the project. It's necessary, but it does add time. And so just to share, the pre-application meeting for this project was actually back in April of 2018, and approval happened in December of 2020. So you can see that it took over 2.5 years to actually get the Placentia project approved. And similarly for Buena Park, we also had to do a general plan amendment from low density residential to high density, and also from residential family or single family 6 to medium density multifamily. We also had to do a tentative tract map to divide the parcel in half, and we had to go through a development agreement application, which was a lengthier process, but it ultimately did give us flexibility on density and parking, and also a reduction in some of the development impact fees. We had to do an initial study mitigated negative declaration again. And so similar to Placentia, we had our pre-application meeting in March of 2018, and ultimately approval did not happen until November of 2020. So, it feels like one of the things that is a challenge for these church sites is that they are often located in single family neighborhoods, and they're often zoned for low density residential. And so if there is a way to streamline that, that is something that could be, very helpful in terms of reducing the amount of time that these projects are taking to be entitled. And I know that Jill Shook is going to actually give, I think, some examples of some tools that cities can actually implement or think about in order to reduce that time and money spent entitling some of these projects. So my last challenge was kind of a tricky one, and that is just, as I was discussing, many of these churches are within existing single family neighborhoods, or they're zoned for low density housing. And so we often hear that neighbors are a little nervous about change. And so, we heard from many people nearby, these two projects in particular, they bought their homes, they didn't think that anything was going to change. And, those parcels have been open space or undeveloped, and they aren't sure about, something being built there. And so when we mention apartments, I picked this image because they often think of these towers. And the reality is that's not what our intent is when we try to come in. We're trying very hard to design something that is compatible with the existing neighborhood. And so we found that extensive education and outreach is really needed in order to kind of help the neighborhood feel comfortable. We've had to talk a lot about different, screening processes and property management tools, parking management tools, in order to really help the neighborhood understand that this could be a really great thing and a really amazing asset for their community, and even increase their property values. And just as part of that neighborhood context, have to bring up parking and traffic, because every single project I think that I've worked on, it has been something that almost every stakeholder is concerned about. And that is, just making sure that there's adequate, right away for vehicles. So again, for these two projects, we had to put together quite extensive materials for parking, from traffic analysis and parking studies, to actually conducting our own internal parking survey, so that we could just give examples of utilization of similar types of projects to help elected officials and the communities feel more comfortable with what was being proposed. And also I wanted to mention that last year, one of the 2 housing bills that was passed was AB 1851, which was actually something that was really great for our Buena Park project because it allowed us to reduce the number of parking spaces that were required for the church. So with that, I'll just kind of wrap up on some of the benefits that we see. You know, for National Core and the churches that we're partnering with, this really has created an opportunity for everybody to kind of further a shared mission to help the community and create a legacy within the communities. And it also creates an opportunity for development to serve as a catalyst. National Core likes to go in. We don't want to just build, you know, one housing, you know, structure and leave. We want to be there. We want to be part of the neighborhood and try to help lift people up as well through investment of money, as well as, you know, helping to provide services and to the community and our residents. And so, you know, really, it also, for our developments, we've entered into ground leases, and this does end up being a pretty mutually beneficial agreement. So the churches actually do maintain ownership of the land, and we are essentially leasing it from them. And so they get that benefit of, you know, payments from that ground lease, and we get the benefit of using their land to construct the housing. So just with that, yeah, we have also, you know, churches are in great areas and they provide a great resource and offer the opportunity to share parking, share all sorts of different community aspects. So yeah, with that, I thank you so much for having me.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I'm wondering if maybe we can take just a couple of questions. Maybe could you talk a little bit about now that you've done this into, like, there's questions I think in the chat or in the Q&A from folks that are churches, like they themselves are a member of a church community. Is there, like, what would be like earmarks that would make for a good opportunity site? Like what would make for like size of a parcel or location?
Oh boy. I think generally, I mean, the size of the site, I mean, we've developed on sites that are half an acre, but it really depends on the zoning. So I think that kind of understanding the context of what is, what can be done on the site with the existing zoning, and what sort of entitlements would be required in order to do multifamily development. Like I said, many of these are, they're zoned for single family uses. And then, you know, for affordable housing, the funding sources are pretty, there's a limited number of them. And so things, I think I was mentioning a little bit, like the scoring of these applications, having good amenities close by, having access to transit, you know, providing housing in high resource areas. So where there's good schools, where there's, you know, access to jobs, that type of stuff is really important.
Okay.
I'm going to talk a little bit about that too, Elizabeth.
Okay, great. Perfect.
Because really all you need is 2 volleyball courts, 2 sand volleyball courts, or a couple parking places. Really, everybody should be doing this. Every church can do at least one, whether it's a pallet shelter, whether it's a 600 square foot 2-bedroom that we did 4 of those. That's what I'm going to show you in a second at the Grove Community Church. Every church can do at least one. That's how we're going to scale this, and that's how we're going to get out of this crisis that we are in California. And if it's a crisis, we got to act like it. That means all hands on deck. That means it's a whole of society approach to stemming the tide, to addressing the crisis. And our governor right now is providing some of these resources to do that. And as well as, I can't remember, SB 330 was referenced, but there is, I know Senator Wiener's got another bill that wasn't brought forward for a final vote, but potentially allowing faith campuses to by right develop housing, as well as institutions of higher learning. So we need to support that. We need to continue to do what we're doing. And let me go through. First, you're probably laughing because I got so many hats on, right? And this is my life. So I got my Army hat, right? What's in it for me? When I was mayor, you know, I duty honor country. So I'm a West Point guy, and so duty honor country is why I started working on this beyond my being convicted as a Christian. But So what's duty on our city mean for me? It meant making sure that everybody had housing, and specifically, as was mentioned earlier, focusing on the veterans. How can we have veteran homelessness in our country? And so that's how I started in the business as mayor. Here's the Riverside, and yeah, I'm a soccer coach. I mentioned that earlier. And then now, different hat I'm wearing as the CEO of Path of Life Ministry. So I'm back into the ministry aspect of housing now. But when I was the mayor, I'm gonna share my screen now and show you what we did. Is that showing? Is that up?
Yep, we can see it.
Yep. Try to. There we go. And did it change? Did the
Yes.
slide change?
Yes.
We're on Riverside, California. Good. So, Love Your Neighbor initiative, and we'll get to the catalyst that brought that to my heart. But I'm not the mayor anymore. Former mayor, as I mentioned, that's even better than being the mayor. And I got to harken back, Bishop Taylor, and someone referenced, I think Tony Mize brought that up when we filled the city council chamber with all of the clergy from around Southern California. You know, what a night that was. And so we got to replicate that. And that's success right there for all of you listening. You got to pack the council chambers with your friends and family and clergy if you can. That was a secret. That was part of the secret sauce for our success. And it was just providence, God, you know, glory to God and everything. But for that night, the clergy, the diocese was having an event in our convention center, right, Bishop? And so I was speaking there earlier, and I challenged them to come down to the city council meeting that night. And what'd they do? They walked down Main Street and they came to the city council meeting, and we got what we asked for. Amen. And I thought St. Michael's, which is the Episcopal Church in Riverside, that's doing 50 units, and I think I have a picture of that I'll show. I thought that was one of the first, at least in the Episcopal diocese, that was going through housing. So it's awesome to hear the other ones that have been that have been before us, previous to our work. But here we go, Riverside, California. So we are a big city. A lot of people think Riverside still, especially the Orange County folks over there. Some of my brethren in Riverside moved to Orange County. I saw that on the chat. But I'm glad you still call Riverside your home, as do I. And so Riverside, 12th largest city, 58th in the U.S. It's big as Cincinnati, Pittsburgh, St. Louis. You know, what don't we have? We don't have a professional sports team. That's the difference, because we're not in the in the Midwest, the only game in town kind of thing. And so you see we, you know, where we lie. For those of you that are from out of California, right in the middle, you know, between LA and Palm Springs, an hour to LA, an hour to the mountains, the beach. We're right in the middle of it in Southern California, the center of inland Southern California. And you can see our faith goes way back, over 100 and something years now, the ecumenical sunrise service that's depicted there in those pictures. And other people mentioned, or were asking questions about other faith groups or denominations that were doing some housing. Seventh-day Adventist Church for us is doing an 80 unit through CORE. National CORE is developing an 80 unit multifamily housing complex on some property of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. We have La Sierra University, Loma Linda University out here. And then the Latter-day Saint population is large out here, and we're working with them on some projects. So Love Your Neighbor vision, God's calling, really convicted me back in 2016 when I wasn't doing enough for my neighbors. And Jimmy White and Bob King popped up in my head. And those were neighbors of mine growing up. Jimmy White was my sister's friend in elementary school, went to Alcott Elementary, and was on a bike ride with his dad in our neighborhood, and his dad ended up hitting a tree in front of our house and didn't have a helmet on. So Jimmy runs into our house, 911, call 911. My dad just hit, he's bleeding, he's not responding. And when I was 10 years old, that's you remember those kind of things. And so we went out. That's the first time I saw an individual, pretty much that was dying in front of my eyes. And Jimmy White, after that, was never the same, right? He ended up getting into drugs to cope with the loss of his dad, and ended up homeless on our streets. And when I was in the Army, I used to come home and see Jimmy and buy him a meal here and there. And then Jimmy disappeared. He died. We lost Jimmy to homelessness. So that's one of my neighbors that I didn't love like I should have. Bob King, similar, my sister Connie's friend, was the ASB president of Pauley High School and UCLA, and had a business up in San Francisco, and ended up selling his business, coming back to Riverside, and to marry his high school sweetheart. Well, that lasted 5-10 years, and he ended up getting divorced and losing himself, losing his wife, losing himself, moving home, lost his parents, his house. Bob King ends up homeless on the streets of Riverside while I was mayor, and I used to have awesome discussions. He's a believer, and now Bob King's missing in action. We lost Bob to homelessness. So that's what convicted me towards this love your neighbor vision, and the calling was initially with veterans homelessness, and then it migrated into more chronically homeless, and organizing with my faith cabinet a faith summit that ended up creating opportunities for housing on church campuses. And so this is the challenge that I threw out at the faith summit. One, we had 400 homeless individuals. Let's all adopt one homeless individual and house them through your church, through your faith campus. That was the vision that God gave me. Legacy, there's always trust issues you got to get through. It was the same here, some challenges, whether it was church and state issues, getting past the former mayor, or issues between city council members, city government, and the faith community. But we got through that. The path was to yes. We know that we need this. So we negotiated towards yes. Board discussion, pastoral transition. There was a transition between pastors at the Grove Community Church. So it's Pastor Tom Lance, who I referenced at the beginning of this presentation, leading the faith cabinet one day. He said, "Yeah, Rusty, we're going to do it. How many units do you need to put up?" I said, "Well, let's start with 4." And so he went back. He basically told me, I said 1. I said 1. He said, "No, we're going to do 4." And I said, "Okay, man. I love your boldness. I love your faith." So this was even before he got to his board to ask them that. And the pastor that has now taken over, Daniel Bishop, confessed to me that he was going for 2, and Pastor Tom Lance was going for 4. And so there was even friction amongst the transitions at the church on how many that they were going to have. But ultimately, the retiring pastor won out. And then community acceptance, as you heard in the previous presentation, there's always the NIMBYs that are out there, even through, and they have a big campus, and this is probably a 50-acre campus that the Grove has, maybe more. But there were still neighbors that heard about this project and resisted and opposed it. So what we did, one of the challenges, one of the ways we got around this challenge, the solution, you guys are asking for solutions to some of these challenges, we had meetings on the church campus at the facility and invited the neighborhood there. And so the church is being a bridge, a natural bridge, inviting and feeding anybody that came, and just kind of, we also planted a couple of formerly homeless females in the audience that ended up answering some of these questions of the angry NIMBYs that were there from the neighborhood. So we built the community acceptance that we needed. Here, I'm getting too excited. I gotta, dang it, I was on a roll. How did I? There we go. So here's the Love Your Neighbor initiative, the Grove Village. Shoot, do we skip over? We got that. That's what it's supposed to look like, and this is what it looks like now. So we, and you'll see 10 weeks the schedule that was a little bit different than the previous couple of years worth of activity. And the difference is that this was a barn raising model. So we really didn't have to jump through the same hoops, general plan amendments and those kind of things. We used the existing CUP of the church, and they just amended the CUP to get us 4 units, 600 square foot units, on two sand volleyball courts that were unused, from what I understand. So underutilized space on your church campus transformed into housing. What better use of property can you get than housing for formerly homeless neighbors? Let's see here. So that's the celebration that we had after at the ribbon cutting, we'll show you, shoot. Somebody managing the slides now. Does somebody have the slideshow under? Which one are you seeing?
We see the one with the ribbon cutting.
Oh, there we go. Okay. All right. We'll get this down, won't we? So there's the timeline. I mean, how would you like that national core to be your timeline? 10 weeks from permit to occupancy. It's not multifamily housing. It was 4 small units, 600 square foot, 2-bedroom. But you know, from when I heard that call and when we had the ceremony was a little over a year and a half. Since then, we've had the likes of the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, Ben Carson, come by and take a look at this and call this a best practice. Let's see here, some of our models. Here's the model, as I mentioned, and the lessons learned on this slide. So it's a high barrier, transitional, housing concept or model. The pastor manages it. They sign a contract. Typically, it's a year versus the shelter, which is 90 days. Permanent supportive housing is labeled as permanent. So there are rules and a contract, and they have access to a counseling center just down the street, financial literacy. You have all sorts of support from a built-in community where they go to church on the weekend and sometimes eat and go to Bible study during the week, and mentor families dropping by, bringing them food and bringing them toiletries or whatever else they need. Some of the issues that have jumped into this, or we've learned over the last couple of years, is that there are going to be some difficult neighbors, difficult individuals living in these houses. There's one story of a lady that we opened the door to and found her a job at Riverside Transit Agency, RTA, as a bus driver. Well, she didn't like her uniform the first day and ended up, I think, not wearing it, and at the end of the day flipped her boss off and lost her job, and ultimately they had to exit her and find her another place to live. They didn't just throw her on the streets, thank God. And the Grove, his sanction is allowed me to tell this story as a lesson learned. But there are issues when you have people living on your property that you gotta work through, and that was one of them. There was a custody dispute. Several of the neighbors that are housed at the Grove are females fleeing domestic violence with their kids. And there was at least one time where the father tried to gain access to the housing, and they had to call some security or police to deal with that. And then this individual that you see on the screen was a 18-year-old emancipated minor that was sleeping at the church and in the ball field next door. And so the teacher knew, one of his teachers at King High School knew about his situation and provided a bridge to the church and ultimately got him into one of the housing units. He had a scholarship to Cal State Humboldt, I believe it was, and is ultimately doing well and college bound. Let's see here. I think that's about. There we go. And then that's, as I mentioned, it was a challenge to all the churches through a faith summit. The Grove was the first one to step up, and this is 2 other church campuses, faith campuses. I believe that's St. Michael's Episcopal on the top there with 50 units. They have retired friars that are going to be part of the community, and then housing for formerly homeless, as well as very low income housing, part of that. And then Crest Community Church, the bottom one, has opened up their land to place modular housing, pre-manufactured, 10 units there. And so really the bottom line is each church is different. Each church can do something, or Faith Campus can do something. And it does depend on the community at the church and around the church as you walk through that process of finding how God is leading you in this direction. We had a couple other programs that we're a part of. The Love Your Neighbor Initiative, social work internship came out of that. You can see some of the victories there and some of the connections and support that we provide through our 3 local universities to churches across the city, as well as YIMBY groups and interestingly enough, for the churches that are saying, wait a second here, housing on our church campus, what is that going to do for, attendance or for tithing? Well, there you have it. They've documented an increased attendance and tithing following the Grove project because of the faithfulness that they've, exhibited as a part of their campus and their church life. And then the last thing, housing plans engineering. So all of you out there can go to this website and it's open sourced. So you can take it right off, 2-bedroom, 600 square foot unit, and take it off the website tonight. Take it back to your congregation. Take a look at it, and depending on which city, every city is going to have a little bit different. So you're going to have to take it through that process and see if they want to give it a stamp of approval. But for us, they're pre-approved in the city of Riverside. So any church in our city can go and pull this off, open sourced, and take it to the counter, and hopefully they will approve each of those units. So here's my contact information as well as the Grove Community Church. God bless you all. Thanks for letting me be a part of this.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your insight. And that gives you a little bit of a taste of a different model where it wasn't a 2-year process. It was really everybody all hands on deck to house literally, 2 or 3 or 4 people on your campus. So I want to leave a little time for some Q&A for the folks that have just spoken before we move into with Jill's going to talk about how churches can do this. But in true church style, I am actually going to make a plug for my organization. So I'm going to, Rusty, can you stop sharing your screen quick?
I thought I did.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, I'm going to share my screen, and I am going there. I don't need to. I'm going to ask that if this has been meaningful to you, and if you value the work that we are doing, I would ask that you can scan this QR code. You can become a member of People for Housing. We are part of a larger YIMBY organization called YIMBY Action, and we have chapters all over the state. So supporting us is supporting the YIMBY movement in California, and actually now we have affiliates in Florida and in Chicago and in Denver. So we are quickly becoming a nationwide movement, but we are really funded by donations and by membership dues. So if this is of value to you, if you have benefited from this, help us keep the lights on, help us continue to be able to convene these types of meetings. So I would just ask for your membership or your support as we are moving through this. Chris, I am going to ask you to take over. I'm going to ask you to take over to talk about a theme. If there's a theme in the comments.
Sure thing. Hi there. Sorry, just getting. I should know how to do Zoom better by now, but here we are. So we've received a lot of great comments and questions through both the chat and the Q&A function. I think one of the most frequent comments is it's like a multi-part question. What is the cost per unit, or at least does it compare favorably on these sites compared to other public or private sites? So I'll just kind of put that question out there. I think Sarah had answered it a bit in the written
and
comment.
we have 2 professionals from Community Development Partnerships, which is based in Newport, and they were the developer that worked with the St. Michael's project in Riverside. So I'm hoping they're there, that maybe they can talk about that. Allison, Kyle?
Yeah, hey, I'm sorry. I was trying to unmute myself. But yeah, this is Kyle Payne. I'm president of CDP. And, we found that the cost is actually less than normal development for affordable housing because oftentimes, and in our situation, the church is putting up an asset they have, which is the land, in order to provide to the project, which reduces the overall cost. So it's been actually really beneficial in our experience with the church.
Maybe a follow-up to that. Does this help them seek, let's say, state or federal funding to help subsidize those projects, their construction and whatnot?
If I can add to that, yeah, this is Kyle again. Yeah, 100%. Having that initial asset coming in and having the, a partner who's the church who owns the property and bringing that first to applying for funding is greatly increases your chances of getting other funding. And I think when we went to the city for funding, that was a great resource to say, hey, the church is helping by contributing their land and also their resources on the services side, which I think was huge. In our project specifically, they were already providing services for the homeless community, and we came in with this concept of adding housing to it, and just were able to combine those resources together to then go leverage funding from the city, then leverage funding from the state, from the county, and so on. And so it's really been a great way to kind of be a great catalyst to start the project.
Wonderful. Another question that has come up a lot and was kind of answered, but maybe we can get some more depth on is how can we make this process go faster? We heard a lot about zoning. Could someone speak to housing elements this year? That's a big topic in Southern California. And how can we use housing elements to help get affordable housing built on these church sites?
Sarah, go for it.
Yeah, so I'm an urban planner by trade, and so I'm actually working on 3 housing elements right now. Elizabeth and I have talked quite a bit about them, and I don't want to steal Jill's thunder, but there are a number of tools that can be used, and zoning definitely is one of them. And state legislature was considering kind of a by right zoning, and there's still a way. And I think Jill, I'm assuming you're going to kind of cover this a little bit.
Yeah.
Okay, so Jill's going to talk about it, but there are some zoning tools that can be used to make this kind of more of a by right process to cut down on that time. Since you saw in my presentation, many of these are taking almost 3 years from start to finish to get entitled, and it shouldn't take that long, but it does with CEQA and the general plan and all the outreach that's required. I mean, it does lengthen the process. So yeah, I mean, I'll let Jill kind of dive into more of the details. With the housing element, though, you can advocate for your cities to put in place programs that change the zoning, and that would be a big first step in order to. And I know Elizabeth, I don't know if you want to share too what Fullerton is doing.
So as part of the housing game plan, we're looking at options, and one of the options that they're looking at is possibly doing housing as a permitted use on religiously zoned land. It's in process. It has not been finalized, but I know that that's one of many tools that the city is looking at because the RHNA numbers are high. So yeah, I think just one thing that I want to just tease out, hopefully for the audience, obviously the use of church property or the use of church land, that has to come from the church. That has to be, a mission-driven decision on their part. But cities are major players in this. And so, if you're representing a faith community and this is something that you think you would like to do, and you see that there's opportunity in your community, approaching your elected officials about making these changes, that's one very concrete action that you can take. You can email your planning director, you can email your city manager, you can email your council members. I mean, ultimately, this is going to be it is a policy decision, so the direction would have to come from your city council. But what better way to exercise the democratic process than to create more opportunity for housing? And cities are looking for places to build housing because the RHNA numbers, the need is so great. So Chris, do we have a couple more questions before we turn it over to Jill?
We do. I'm afraid I'm going to keep stealing her thunder. So maybe.
Oh, okay. Well, then let's just go ahead and let her present. So I'd like to welcome Jill Shook with Making Housing Happen. She is in Pasadena and has been doing this work for many years. And I'm just going to let her take it away.
Well, good evening. I'm just thrilled to be part of this panel. And I first want to thank Elizabeth and YIGBY for inviting me today. And I thank everyone who's here on the Zoom. It's just awesome to see so many folks. I am the executive director of Making Housing and Community Happen. Our website is makinghousinghappen.org. And we've been doing this housing justice for the last 20 years here in Pasadena, and we've now expanded throughout Southern California. We have 7 teams. So we're working on various aspects of housing justice: accessory dwelling units, community land trust, safe parking, permanent supportive, affordable, and inclusionary housing, and some aspects of community development and leadership development. We have 25 churches within our network, and people we're training within those congregations to be the advocates that are needed to get this work done. But tonight I'm just focusing on one of our committees called Congregational Land Committee. So this committee started about 2 years ago, and we're very faith rooted in our approach. So as we begin a new team, we sense the Spirit's leading. And then when we begin to see a strong leadership team emerge, then we will launch a new effort. So one day, Phil Burns, who's the principal planner for the Arroyo Group and a key leader at the Pasadena Presbyterian Church in town, and I were discussing this concept of congregations providing affordable housing on their underutilized land. And we both sense God's leading. And so Arroyo Group, I want to tell you a little bit about it. They planned Pasadena's, the old Pasadena Civic Center and Playhouse District, and they've won awards around the country for their planning efforts. So Phil and I began to invite key players, the ex-city manager and 2 ex-planning commissioners for our city, one who is a land use lawyer, 2 affordable housing developers, one who's Harvard trained, and both either people of color, Latino, African American. So we had a very diverse team, a very strong team. We've met every 2 weeks for the last year and a half, or since its inception almost 2 years ago. And we just began to imagine and plan how to create a powerful model, listening to what churches really need to get this work done. So we decided early on not to invite churches, but to make our model so attractive that churches would just want to come and participate. So churches with excess and underutilized land are constantly having developers call them. And we didn't want to be one more church or one more organization knocking at their door. We wanted them to choose in as they heard about our efforts. And it's astounding. We already have 34 churches in our pipeline without advertising. And so this truly feels to us like an emerging best practice that builds the kind of trust going forward, where the churches themselves begin to imagine and contact us. And so we didn't want to charge for the services we provide. And so we've come up with a business plan that allows us to do this, and with grant funding. And as Elizabeth mentioned, that I've written a book on what churches are doing to address the housing crisis. It's called Making Housing Happen, Faith-Based Affordable Housing Models. And so it's being used amazingly on campuses around the country, even USC. I'm just quite astounded by that myself. But we found, even in all the effort in that I researched in what churches doing this, that it's just really not always a good idea for churches to become their own developer. That for the most part, it's better for them to partner with an existing developer. So there's one chapter in one of the earlier versions of my book that does talk about a church becoming a developer, a pastor becoming a developer, but he partnered with the UCLA's Department of Architecture to do that. A second model also featured in Minnesota, with a savvy developer works alongside a congregation, as together they develop. But we're just finding that it's best for churches to partner with existing affordable housing developers. We work closely with National Core in so much of what we're doing. They're even part of our team. And we so appreciate tonight the presentation and the beautiful work of National Core. And so obviously they know how to win the tax credits and do all the kind of excellent work that that's needed, you know, and the kind of excellent units that low-income people deserve. And so working alongside the church to select, we work alongside the church to help them select a good neighbor, a good developer, because it's going to be a long, you know, they'll be in relationship for a long time. So we see this also as an emerging best practice to have a church partner with an existing developer. We also have come up with this 5-step process that we do with each congregation that we meet with. We initially meet with an interested congregation, their leader or a group of leaders, to discern, help them clarify what is their vision, what kind of housing do they have in mind, what population do they want to serve, what part of their land do they want to see better utilized and to be good stewards of what they have. We've had churches go directly to a developer, and they often point to us and says, meet with these guys first, you know, and get it clear what you want before you come to us. So anyway, we go through these 5 steps. We help them understand what can be done on their land. We look at both financial and land use feasibilities, and then we provide a number of architectural concept scenarios. And then we just go back and forth with the church until they have something they love and that they can live with and that the neighbors can live with. We even do outreach with neighbors at this point. We often work at this point with the city leaders and make sure that they're all good with where we're going with this. And then it's ready, you know, it's ready to start creating an RFP, a request for proposals. And that's then pitched to potential development partners. And we meet with the church if they want, as they're making that selection, and help them. We provide advisement if they wish throughout the entire pre-development and development process, so that the church is being empowered and they know what they're doing and they have wisdom in how they're moving through this whole process. We're grateful for the grants that have allowed us to offer this service, as I mentioned, without charge. So making housing and community happen, we're very committed to racial justice. And in the area of Pasadena where we're doing the community development that I mentioned, there's about 10 ethnic churches right within a few block area. Majority of those are Black churches, and they're all struggling. They're all struggling due to gentrification. Primarily, that's the reason. And so in fact, there's one church that has only 8 members left. And so several of these churches have felt the call to provide housing to stay off displacement and better utilize their land. But the zoning wasn't making it possible for them to accomplish their vision. So we invited Terry Tornick, makes me think of Rusty tonight, and you know, the previous mayor of our city. So he came and he met these pastors and he listened. He listened to their pain. He listened to the dramatic stories of the loss of their members. And then we walked around to each church and he looked at their sites and he leaned over and he said to me, Jill, these are ideal sites for a development. And I thought, wow, that's encouraging, you know. And so he went on to make it part of his reelection campaign. So upon deliberating after the mayor left, it was just so powerful because these pastors felt heard. One even began to cry. They felt so honored to have the mayor come and really listen. And it was a powerful moment. But we have congregations throughout Southern California that are hurting, and they don't realize that they have the very thing under their feet that can help turn their pain into joy and present an opportunity to address the housing crisis. It's really a beautiful thing that the first church in our 34 church pipeline is a Black church, an African-American church. And, you know, the churches, they get income from this. They get a fair return for their land. And in the process of getting that income, this particular church has said, we are going to take that money and use it to pay the rents for people that are struggling, that can't afford to stay in our city. It's just so powerful to see this first church that we have worked with and how they're just bringing so much benefit to the community through this. Our team continued to research. So this particular church, it's not even, at this point, you can't even do residential. It's not even zoned for housing. And so, so we, of all these 34 churches, there's almost none that have the proper zoning to allow them to accomplish their dreams and what churches would like to do with their property. And so we began to imagine as a team, what are we going to do to address this? We did our homework. We studied every church in the city. We came up with a policy that would be sensitive to the character of the community, but still allow for the right density that enables the funding sources to kick in. And we pitched this to each of our city council members, together with all the churches within their district. We went to the planning department. They loved our research and the concepts that we were coming up with. And now they have created their own proposal that's now working its way through all the city processes to become policy for the city. But other cities have gotten wind of this, what we're calling an overlay zone that we've proposed. And now other cities have been asking us to present on how to create these overlay zones. So I really hand it to National Core for going through a whole general plan amendment. That's a huge thing. And so this essentially isn't a general plan amendment. This is an overlay zone that would allow every church in your city that is interested in doing this to have the proper zoning. And so now we've got other cities looking to adopt this. So this is another service that we're offering, and we would be glad to talk with anyone or any city interested in just looking at some of the research, what we're learning, and some of the best practices around this. In the process of all of this, we help churches kind of understand. There's a chapter in my book that talks about a theological framework for land use from Genesis to Revelation. And that really undergirds our understanding of a God who's involved in redemption at every level, of every inch of the soil and all the laws that govern how that property is to be used, not just for a few, but that can afford it, but for all that are in need of housing. So it's a joy to be part of this redemptive process and to tell you a little about our story today, and allow us to share with you. And I hope that you'll reach out to us to making housing and community happen, so we can together imagine, what could happen on your church campus, what can happen in your cities to get the zoning right. There's a number of questions, I think, in terms of property size, and I'd just like to answer one of those questions before we go to more of a Q&A with everyone else. But we have proposed that this overlay amendment also includes what's called adaptive reuse. And so that essentially is where you can take the existing church building and use that for a different use, to use it for housing. And so in that case, you could even be a small church, and you might have a building that you don't have the money to maintain. And so, but you're not really using it. And so this could be adapted into housing, and that's been done on a number of campuses around the country. There was one more question that I wanted to address that Sarah mentioned. Sarah, what was the question you said I should try to focus on? Help me out here.
I think for housing elements and just for cities in general, kind of what are some of the tools?
Yeah. Thank you. Yes, absolutely. So we are working, we have a team, an ad hoc committee working with the housing element. Pasadena has a sizable number of units required to be planned for, over 9,000 units, and about 6,000 that need to be affordable. So it's just huge compared to most cities in Orange County and other areas. And so this is a huge benefit for cities. We're finding cities are very eager to do these overlay zones so they can count all of those churches interested as part of their RHNA, which is called RHNA is the Regional Housing Needs Assessment. It's the assessment of units that each city is allocated that they have to plan for. So yeah, cities are scrambling, and they're very excited to look at church property and doing this. So
So
I
I'm
think
just
that's
gonna,
all. Yeah, go ahead.
no, I just want to read this because I think this question from in the Q&A from, I think it's from Maya Dunn. She says, assume a faith institution might be interested in doing this. What would you recommend a church or faith institution do related to opportunities to get more city support? Would you recommend anything related to the housing element process, which is going on now? So I think you were you gave the answer, but just as a summary, if churches are interested in having their land reused for affordable housing, your city is going to have to prepare a sites inventory as part of its housing element. Please reach out to your planner and tell them that you are interested in this, because one of the new criteria to have a site identified is you have to show, quote, owner interest. There has to be some level of interest from the property owner. So if you are interested in this and you are representing a faith community, yes, please contact your planner. They would love to hear from you because they're scrambling to find locations. And if you are a planner or an elected official on this webinar and you know the faith community in your town, or you have a, I mean, there's lots of ways to get in touch. You can go through the Chamber of Commerce, you can go through the Collaborative, you can go through, there's so many community organizations that the faith community is plugged into. There's ways to get it, folks. And if this is something that you would consider, as your city would consider doing, reach out, because you don't know what treasures lie that just haven't been turned over yet.
Let me just jump in here real quick and respond to that. I really appreciate what you're saying, Elizabeth. And I think when churches are willing to offer their site as part of the inventory for the housing element, that's the first step. But then oftentimes those churches don't have the proper zoning to even allow that to happen. And so that's where we're hoping to see in our housing elements overlay zones. And so that would then get the zoning right so that churches indeed can accomplish what they want to do. Without having the proper zoning, that site is not helpful, you know. And so so we would like to see every city in Southern California in their housing elements have an overlay zone. And so they can indeed allow churches by right to do this. And so this is key, and this is what I want everyone to really pay attention to. If the zoning is by right as opposed to discretionary, then you can save at least a year in the development time and at least $100,000 per project. And that's a conservative estimate. We have found that getting the zoning fixed is a very time, labor, expensive process. And I think that's why I so respect National Core, because they're going through that painful process. But, and I know Rusty has talked about it, and the bishop has talked about it tonight. And it's just zoning dictates everything, you know. And so we, as the body of Christ, of church, or whatever faith group you're part of, Baha'i, Seventh-day Adventist, whatever it is, we have a huge army of advocates and people that could show up and say, this is what we want to be able to do. And they can become advocates, just like every prophet in the Old Testament. I think all of them as advocates. They all spoke to kings. They all spoke to those people in power about the most vulnerable. That's at the center of every single story and every single prophetic part of the Old Testament. The poor and the orphan are part of that, the center of that, and the purpose for those interactions with those people in power. And so as the church comes together, and congregations and all different flavors of faith communities work together to create this change, we'll get the work done, you know. But it takes a lot of advocates because there's a lot of opposition. The first time I went to the Planning Commission clear back in 2001, after AB 1866 was passed, they had never seen the Baha'i, the Black churches, the neighborhood leaders, 2 or 3 other churches, and the synagogue all show up together in the Planning Commission. You know, they're sitting there going, "How did you guys come together? What's this about?" You know, and we just basically said, we want to be able to build in our backyards. You know, can you make that happen for us? And then we started asking them, what would you like to see in your backyard? And they started talking about how they had kids coming home from college, and that'd be kind of a cool instead of an old car back there. And so it became personal, it became real, and we got the policy passed. It was so exciting. So this kind of excitement as we come together, work together to create the change to end homelessness. That's what I love about what Rusty said. He isn't just talking about doing a few housing units. He wants to end homelessness. And I think that's what we all should have as a goal. And it's not impossible. It's not. We've lowered our homeless count in Pasadena by 54% in the last 10 years. And I know that we can end homelessness as we continue to work together. Thanks.
Awesome. I don't think I can say anything more to add to that. We are 2 minutes from 7 p.m. I want to respect everybody's time, but do you want to say a few closing thoughts, Bishop Taylor and Sarah and Mayor Bailey?
I just want to thank my colleagues and remind everyone that we're continually engaged in a dynamic of change and of letting go and of letting God and moving toward the light. These experts have shown all the different ways we can sort of move ourselves a little closer to the light by working the problem and being hopeful and especially being communicative and collaborative with people who are inclined to be in opposition. Listen to them as much as we listen to the advocates and just move it forward and do the work. And you are all amazing prophets, and thank you.
Thank you.
Sarah, you want to say?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I honestly actually think that the process of working these church partnership projects has been some of the most fulfilling, and I've definitely met some of the most passionate people on these projects, and it has been really inspiring to work with all of you. And yeah, I look forward and hope that this is something that can play a big role in building more affordable housing throughout Southern California.
Man, I want the bishop to, do the benediction. I put a couple things in the chat. You can't end homelessness without housing. Jesus was homeless, and I loved the bishop's "Jesus is watching" phrase, and cultivating curiosity and developing relationships. And my mantra is everything rises and falls on leadership. And so, those of you out there that you are looking at how do we start this, it takes leadership. And that means the elected officials, that means the faith community, that means the private sector, the business community, all coming together again, sitting around the table and figuring this out and supporting each other. So I'm here to help and would love to come talk to your congregations, your city councils, your chambers of commerce, whatever I can do to help you all out. Elizabeth has heard me on the pulpit with SCAG and the regional housing needs assessment, and boy, that those numbers are overwhelming for individuals, but also for cities. But you know what? That's because they're not thinking about the power of God and the power of the church coming together and opening their doors and opening their parking lots and opening their space to do housing. And what's more important than a home, Bishop? That's where it all starts, isn't it, Jill?
Yeah, I just think about what was asked
foundation of our society.
That Moses was asked, what do you have? What do you have in your hand? And I think we just need to start there. We have parking lots, we have a lot. And I want to offer another resource that I didn't mention, and I'd like to close out with this, is that we do one-day housing justice institutes. And these provide an opportunity for the city to come together and grapple with this and think about it theologically. And we've done these around the country. They're a powerful tool. So talk to me about that if you want to see an institute in your community. But yeah, thank you. This has been great. Appreciate your time.
Awesome. Well, I'm very grateful for your time and your expertise and joining joining us. This was something that I wanted to do when I met Bishop Taylor, and I kind of was a bit in awe because I don't think I've ever met a famous clergy person, and I got to meet one, so it was a little awestruck. But I was also awestruck at listening to Mayor Rusty Bailey speak at SCAG. I was there when they made that vote in person. So this really, for me, was a passion project to bring together my training as a planner and my belief in really loving your neighbor in a way that is sacrificial, because that's what we're called to. And so if you consider yourself a person of faith, being a NIMBY is not an option, because you're being asked to give of yourself. And that is why I do this work. So with that, I'm going to say thank you to all of you for your time and your expertise and your kindness to me in making yourself available. I'm going to say thank you to the 72 people that are still on this webinar, and we had 130 at the top when in the middle. So I definitely consider this a success. We will follow up with a link to this recording and with contact information, definitely for Jill, definitely for Mayor Rusty, and Sarah, if there's somebody at National Core that we can put forward, and Bishop Taylor, if there's someone at the diocese that we should, well, I mean, you guys have your own conduits because you're all Episcopal, and that's what it means to be a liturgical and Episcopal church. So you have your own conduits, but if there's any contact info for anybody in your area that we should have, we will definitely send that out to everyone who registered, whether you attended or not. And with that, I will say thank you and good night.
Thank you.